As I announced, this Wednesday, program will be in the evening, Wednesday 5 p.m. onwards. Janmashtami, it is a full day celebration. I mean, there's a lot of seva through the day and also the days leading onto it. The coming weekend, which is a long weekend, we'll have full day, 3 days of seva. So please, we are requesting everyone, please join us from Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. Monday is a holiday for Labor Day. So please come and spend the time in the temple, and there'll be lots of opportunities for preparing for Janmashtami. And Janmashtami, 4 p.m. all the way till midnight, we have wonderful festivities. And then the day after that, Srila Prabhupada's appearance day, the program will be in the morning, starting at 11, and we'll end with lunch prasada. Okay, so we'll have more details about how you can get involved with Janmashtami festival, sponsorship opportunities, volunteer opportunities after the talk. But now, let's warmly welcome His Holiness bkg Goswami Maharaj ki Hare Krishna.
So, my talk will be a little shorter today because we're going to talk about Janmashtami, and we have a guest who's going to be helping me. I don't recognize you right now because you're dressed differently than I've ever seen you before. But I have a guest who's going to be, so you can bring a chair up and sit over there, who's going to be assisting me in doing this sort of little interactive thing. But first we're going to read from the Bhagavad Gita, and first we're going to chant Jai Radha Madhava. Who's that? Careful, don't slip on the dhoti. I had one disciple from India, from Maharashtra, and first time he put on a dhoti, he was taking me to the airport, and he didn't know how to put the dhoti on properly. Don't worry, it didn't fall off. And he tripped and he broke my bag. So I said, "You are prohibited from ever wearing a dhoti again in this lifetime." Because nothing is more dear to me than my travel bag. So anyway. Well, this is Adi Purusha, right? Is that your name? Okay, good. So this is Adi Purusha, and we're going to be speaking a little bit today, after a brief reading of Bhagavad Gita verse in relationship to this, about something called ABCD. When it's not alphabets we're talking about. It's about people born in certain places who may be confused because their parents are born in other places. That's a good way to say it, isn't it? And cultural differences and all sorts of interesting things. But let's do something spiritual first. Let's chant Hare Krishna. I chant the Jai Radha Madhava. Jai Radha Madhava Kunya Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunya Bihari Gopinana Balaba Giribadura Hule Gopinana Balaba Giribadura Hule Yasodanandana Prajadanandana Yasodanandana Prajadanandana Yamuna Tera Vanachare Yamuna Tera Vanachare Jayo Radhu Madhuba Kunya Bihare Jai Radha Madhuva Kunya Bihare Gopi Jana Balaba Giribadudare Gopi Jana Balaba Giribadudare Yasodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yasodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tera Manachare Yamuna Tera Manachare Jai Radha Madhova Kunya Bihare Jai Radha Madhova Kunya Bihare Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravidikacharya Osutela Satashi Shimad His Divine Grace Abhaya Charananda Bhaktivedanta Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananda Koti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Param Se Kaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shadwaita Gadadha Shivasati Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Saim Kun Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Vrindavanam Ki Jai Mathuram Ki Jai Jagannath Swami Ki Jai Yamunamai Ki Jai Srimati Lasi Devi Ki Jai Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Gaur Premananda Hari Hari Bol All glories the assembled devotees, all glories the assembled devotees, all glories the assembled devotees, all glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanamani Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Vacharni Nivishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deja Tarni Prabhupada Ki Jai Somagana Timidanda Shah Gananjana Shlakaya Chakshurun Meditam Yeda Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I offer my respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet of my spiritual masters, Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who so kindly opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge while I was blinded in the darkness of ignorance. Okay, so first we're going to read from the Bhagavad Gita, 13th chapter, text 22, just to introduce this whole topic. And this is, of course, Adipurusha. If you notice him glancing at the TV from time to time up there, he's trying to see if his parents are watching. Oh, yeah. Oh, are you on the screen? Okay. Okay, so let's read from Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita. And it's a very important verse in the 13th chapter, text 22. I'm just going to read it quickly. Purusha prakatisto hi punkte avrakate jan gunan kardanam guna sangalsya sarasad yoni yanmasu. The living entity in material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of nature. This is due to his association with material nature. That's the key. Thus he meets with good and evil amongst various species. And Prabhupada explains, this verse is very important for an understanding of how the living entities transmigrate from one body to another. It is explained in the second chapter that the living entity is transmigrating from one body to another, just as one changes dress. This change of dress is due to his attachment. What? Closer? Can you still hear me? If it gets too close, it pops. Like this. You won't be able to understand me that well. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. See, most people keep the mic too close, so then it distorts. This change of dress is due to attachment to material existence. As long as he is captivated by this false manifestation, he has to continue transmigrating from one body to another. Due to his desire to lord it over material nature, he is put into such undesirable circumstances. Under the influence of material desire, the entity is born sometimes as a demigod, sometimes as a man, sometimes as a beast, a bird, or a worm, or as aquatic, or a saintly man, or as a bug. Pretty depressing. This is going on. And in all cases, the living entity thinks himself to be the master of his circumstances, yet he is under the influence of material nature. How he is put into such different bodies is explained here. It is due to association with the different modes of nature. One has to rise, therefore, above the three material modes and become situated in the transcendental position that is called Krishna consciousness. Unless one is situated in Krishna consciousness, his material consciousness will oblige him to transfer from one body to another, because he has material desires since time immemorial. But he has to change that conception. That change can be effected only by hearing from authoritative sources. The best example is here, Arjuna's hearing the science of God from Krishna. The living entity, if he submits to this hearing process, will lose his long-cherished desire to dominate material nature, and gradually and proportionately, as he reduces his desire to dominate, he comes to enjoy spiritual happiness. In a Vedic mantra, it is said that as he becomes learned in association with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he proportionally relishes his eternal blissful life. So, basically, once upon a time, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was asked by someone, please tell us the quality of a devotee. Now, why should one want to know the quality of a devotee? Why should one want to be a devotee? Why should one want to be advanced in Krishna consciousness? Because one will experience what? Sat Chit Ananda, which is our eternal nature. Sat means eternality. Chit means knowledge, complete knowledge, and Ananda means bliss, means unlimited happiness. So that's our nature, but right now that nature is covered. It's like the sun. Sometimes, if it's cloudy outside, the sunshine is covered as far as we're concerned. The sun is not actually covered, but the sunshine is covered as far as our perception of it is concerned. So, in the same way, karnam gunasangasya sadasad janma jonisu, we become covered by our contamination or association with the modes of nature. What are the modes? Goodness, passion, and ignorance. And sometimes the mode of goodness is prominent. It defeats the mode of passion and ignorance. And sometimes the mode of passion is prominent, defeating the mode of goodness and ignorance. And you get the idea. The modes are in continual flux or struggle for control of you. And sometimes you get mixed modes. You know, passion and ignorance mix, goodness and ignorance, goodness and passion mix. And so this is really what's shaping our consciousness. So this is one of the issues I wanted to bring up. Another issue, I'm just introducing the issues. Another issue is details versus essentials or principles, the details of Krishna consciousness. So there are certain details and certain principles. Principles means things that are trans-cultural. Like what? Chanting Hare Krishna is definitely trans-cultural, right? No? Transculture means it's good for every culture. Whether you're from India, whether you're from America, whether you're from Alaska, Where else? South Africa, Antarctica, you're a penguin, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter where you're from. Chanting Hare Krishna is trans-cultural. But there's other things that are cultural, such as the way we dress. Like in China, we have a lot of nice devotees, Chinese devotees, and they dress in traditional Chinese outfits. And they play traditional Chinese instruments, and they eat their prasadam with chopsticks. You know what chopsticks are? They're two little sticks. I tried it. I couldn't eat anything, and I got hungry because everything kept falling off of the chopsticks. But they were expertly able to do it, Even take their soup with chopsticks, and I couldn't figure out how they did that. I just couldn't figure it out. So it's a cultural thing. So cultural things are not transcultural. They're not essentials. They're not principles of Krishna consciousness, but sometimes we confuse those cultural things with principles. In other words, we think, well, the only way to chant Hare Krishna is with the cartels. But you see that guitar there right next to him? I play the guitar, and I'm a sannyasi. What a mixture. Who's ever seen a sannyasi play a guitar before? But people like it. Even people from India like it. Actually, they like it more than the Americans. So, and most Bollywood music has guitar music, right? And keyboard. Keyboard, guitar, So, but there are certain cultural things. So, and then the modes of nature. So these are the two subject matters, general subject matters we're going to be dealing with today, hopefully rather quickly, because we do want to talk about Janmashtami at the end. So let's start with the first one, which is perhaps a little more difficult, the association with the modes of nature. That many of you, including me, come from rather conservative backgrounds. Conservative means I can relate to those of you who are older coming from India, because I come from the late 1940s. I was a baby boomer. You know what a baby boomer is? I boomed after the war. I was born after the war. So things were rather, even from an American perspective, they were rather dharmic. And the worst thing that anyone ever did was he smoked a cigarette. And there were no divorces. And boyfriends and girlfriends usually had to be chaperoned. Sounds interesting, doesn't it? Some of you are thinking, this is crazy. But this is where I come from. And so many of you from India come from a similar type of ethical, moral background. I was taught, obey your parents, honor your father and mother, listen to your father and mother, whatever they say. And so, so it's hard sometimes for people like me to relate to the modern culture. So I'm just drawing parallels. Interesting. So I'm drawing about. So it's interesting, sometimes I talk to people at the university, and oh my God, what's happening here? And the people tell me, but this is natural. Everybody does it. They don't understand me, and I don't understand them. Because it's a cultural difference. And it's also, actually rolling in the modes of nature, which I said I would talk about. The modes of nature, too, are much more in the mode of ignorance and passion than they were before. I remember the TV shows that I used to watch. They were like a happily married couple. The worst thing is the son would be a little rascal. He'd get chastised. Didn't do anything really bad. The worst thing he did is he went swimming without permission. So, so the modes of nature, there was meat eating, but of course in India there was meat eating too. So the modes of nature were towards the higher modes of nature. So anyway, relating to many of you come from India, and same thing as me. I'm an American-born confused devotee. So I'm also an ABCD. You know, the expression ABCD refers to American-born confused Desis, okay? Because Dwaita here is not confused because he was born in India. He's just like a full Desi. He's a DDDD, you know. So anyway, so you're facing all sorts of challenges with your children who are interacting, and some of you may not be aware of that. You know, I'm aware of that because I'm interacting with young people all the time. But some of you, you know, send your kids off to school and you think, oh, it's dharmic. It's like the old gurukulas they used to have. Well, not really. It's not like that. I mean, it's like anything goes, and things that are inconceivable go too. So now I'd like to call on my associate, who's very uncomfortable wearing a dhoti. So, and he's initiated. Just to explain who this is. This is Adi Purusha. He's a disciple, and has a PhD from Cambridge University. So he's quite an educated chap. And you know, his parents put him through the university. So he's going to explain some of the challenges that he's had, if his parents aren't watching. Otherwise, he's written out of the will. So anyway, so he's going to explain some of the challenges that he has, and then he's going to ask for other people. Do we have the other microphone here? Or what happened with the other microphone? Is it inside, outside? Because then we want to keep switching the microphone around. Because I like making comments as we go along, as you can tell. So he's going to explain his experience with this, you know, cultural difference. The two things: the cultural differences, which are not really essentials, and then the relationship with the older people. The challenges with the relationship with the older people brought up in a different culture, and then also the mode of nature thing. Can you think you can remember all three of those things? He's a professor. Yeah. That's the problem of modern education. Because I was always a good boy, my memory's good, even at 74, so. You know, the modern world, things start to go down after the age of 18. So, probably earlier. So, I mean, I'm teasing a little bit. I'm just exaggerating to make a point. So, he's going to explain some of the challenges. Hopefully you explain. Okay.
So, there's, well, Omegana Tibrandasya Gana Agnashalakaya Chakshurun Litamina Jasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pastai Budalesh Matibir Krishna Dasgawami Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pastai Budalesh Mati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschata Deshatarane. So yeah, there's a few things that in particular that I wanted to touch on. So I'm an ABCD, for those that didn't catch it earlier. That means American-born confused Deshi. And there's a reason why that term is there. One thing, and I think this is important for any immigrant who comes from another culture to America to know, myself and many other ABCDs were basically caught in these two different cultural worlds. I'm sure many of you can relate with that. So one world is the world of our parents, which is, in my case, India. And as it was kind of presented to me, in India, if you don't study, then it kind of sounded like you just end up in poverty and die or something. It was, if you don't study, then you'll end up homeless and in front of Walmart asking for money or something. It was kind of like that. That's my exposure to Indian culture. That you have to study hard so that you can make it out of poverty and, you know, be a doctor and have money or something like that. And I also come from what's a particularly prestige Indian family, so my experiences may be different than some of yours. My mom is a doctor, my dad is a doctor, my mom's brother is the dean of the business school at Yale University, one of the best universities in the world. My brother is a professor at NYU in the business school, one of the top business schools in the world. His wife is, you know, like a doctor also. His wife's brother is in medical school. So, you know, there's prestige on all corners. So it's, you know, my upbringing is extremely competitive. So that's kind of the Indian side of my family, this intense, cutthroat, competitive Indian culture that is trying to just get ahead so that you don't have to, I don't know, drive a rickshaw in India or something. So that's one side of the culture. The other culture is Western culture. That's what I was kind of born, and that's what I see all around me. So when I go to school or went to school, thankfully I'm at a public school, I'll speak more about that, but in public school, that's not the culture I'm exposed to. Like, people are not concerned about working hard so that they can escape poverty. They're just basically Westerners that want to live their own life and be happy and follow Western culture. And have fun, yeah, and be their own person, and they don't want their parents telling them what to do, they just want to enjoy life. So it's very confusing being in both worlds. You know, my parents will try to relate and sympathize with me, and they'll try to impart their values onto me. But it's very difficult to relate to that because it's like, okay, like, yes, you're from India, you came here, but like, I'm not in India, I'm in America. Like, people are, you know, they have a completely different way of life here. So like, you know, do I follow my parents who are, you know, coming from this culture that I'm not even exposed to? Do I follow this Western culture, which is basically, you know, what all my friends are following, what I see at school? It's this very confusing, you know, very complicated mess. That's why the C is there in ABCD. It stands for confused. It's a very confusing experience. And so my advice to parents would be, just be aware of this, because if you try to parent your children the way that your parents parented you in India or the way that you might parent your children in India, it's very difficult because, you know, like, my parents would try, you know, they'd be like, oh, you know, when we were young or when we were in India, they do all this kind of, you know, back in my day type of stuff. And it just, like, I couldn't relate to it, and it came out one ear and out the other. It's like, okay, like, I'm not, you know, I can't relate to this at all. Like, it's very foreign. I mean, they wanted me to study hard so I could, you know, be successful, and then the people I'm going to school with are just like, I don't know, picking their nose and playing basketball and and doing all sorts of nonsense that I'll speak more about later. So that's one thing. It's very confusing. So if you have some understanding of that, it's very helpful because, like, our ability to do austerities is kind of compromised because of that. If you want to, like, you know, I'm sure if my parents, when they were in India, you know, it was harder to just focus. It's very hard to just focus on school. I mean, you're like, you know, you're trying to fit in, you're trying to, you know, make friends, you're trying to just understand your identity. It's very hard to just buckle down and study. You know, there's all this emotional stuff that's going on, and it's like, you know, it takes work to actually just deal with that and, you know, like, process that. So I wasn't actually raised in Krishna consciousness. My parents are kind of, I mean, they're like Hindu, but they're not quite Krishna conscious. I'm sure if I was growing up in Krishna consciousness, it'd be very hard for me to focus on Krishna consciousness, because in order to be focused on Krishna consciousness, your basic needs have to be met. But, you know, if as an ABCD, you're just trying to understand your identity, and you don't even know your identity, your emotions are all over the place, so, like, your needs are not quite there, so it's very hard to just, you know, accept and get into Krishna consciousness. That's one thing. Another thing is the school system in America and how bad the culture is. Like Maharaj was speaking, you know, there's modes of nature. I don't know exactly how it was in India, but I'm sure the environment and culture was basically more cultured and civilized than what you find in America. In America, it's quite bad, and it's gotten much worse even since I was in the school system. So an example of what you might expect in the American school system, I would say in my time, by the time it's middle school, people are already having, you know, like, premarital sex, doing a lot of drugs, doing a lot of drinking and things like that. That's very common. Probably 99.9%, at least, of guys are basically addicted to pornography, probably before the time they're like 14 years old. If there's a guy that has a phone, they're probably looking at pornography and are addicted to it. The students at school will even brag about how much they watch it. So it's not that, even if your child is kind of protected from that, the people around them that they're with will talk about it and even brag about it. And it's, there's guys would brag about how many times they would look at pornography in a day. It's quite bad. It's probably gotten a lot worse, by the way. Drug use is very common. Most people are probably drinking by the time they get to high school. Marijuana is very common. The harder stuff is probably not so common in public school nowadays, but drug use is very common. And another thing as an ABCD that people should be aware of is we have a very strong need for belonging. Everyone has a need for belonging, but for an ABCD, it's more complicated because we don't quite feel like we relate to our home life because it's this culture that's very different from us. We don't really feel like we relate to our Western friends because they also can't really understand us and what we're going through. So we don't have a sense of belonging, and so we're very strongly desiring a sense of belonging. And if you talk to many other guru coolies in our movement, they all struggle with this idea. They're in two cultural worlds. They're just struggling to find their place in the world. So let's say you take an ABCD. They're in this public school system where there's all this pressure and temptation to do, mode of ignorance activities. They're really struggling to find their sense of belonging. They don't quite feel a sense of belonging at home. They're trying to find a sense of belonging at school. So what naturally happens is that they'll try to do all sorts of crazy things to fit in. And, in their desire to fit in, some people are better about it, but, people basically go kind of wild and just do everything they can to fit in and feel a sense of belonging. One thing with Indian culture, the parents might behave when they're as long as they're with you, living with you, but as soon as they go to college, that's kind of when, it's like if you keep pushing something down, eventually it's just going to come up and explode. So oftentimes at college, with many parents many children, people just kind of go crazy. Many Indians are much more crazier in college than some of the Westerners who have kind of just, not really been, repressed, I guess you can say, for their whole life. So the school system is very bad. Like I said, it's gotten worse. Nowadays, if people are unaware of Western culture, there's songs that glorify illicit, romantic activities. Those songs get Grammys, which are the, music awards. They're voted the best songs of the year or something like that. It's actually very crazy. Those performers go on the Grammys, which is broadcasted to, hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people, and they actually perform live pornographic acts on stage. So that's the thing that children are basically watching and being exposed to. So if your child is in public school, they're basically being exposed to all this, rampant illicit activity, mode of ignorance activity, and there's a lot of pressure for them to basically compromise their principles and to basically fit in. So that's the second point. A third point, I hope I'm staying on track.
Yeah, you're doing a good job of it.
Okay.
One thing I wanted to ask you about is guilt trips.
Oh, that's my next topic. That's what I was going to speak about.
Okay, jumping the gun.
Okay.
when let's say the parents or whatever try to control you with guilt trips.
Yeah, so there's this concept called a guilt trip. It's basically when it happens not just in Indian culture, Jewish culture as I understand.
Yeah.
Probably in a lot of Western cultures, it's also there. It's pretty common. It's basically when if you want someone to do something you want, you'll try to coerce them by making them feel guilty, and you'll basically keep making them feel guilty and guilty and guilty until they agree with what you're doing.
Give an example.
Yeah, so one example is, look, Krishna Das, we came to America. You don't know how hard we worked. We had to really work very hard. We studied very hard. We didn't go to parties when we were young. We just studied, and that's why we're here today. We came here just for you, just so you could have a nice education. We did this so you could have all these opportunities. So why are you, not studying? Why are you playing basketball with your friends? You should be, reading and studying for the SAT. How old are you? Oh, you're 12? Yeah, you should be studying for the SAT already. What are you doing?
It's true.
Look at Rahul. He's 9 and he's already, studying for the SAT. Why can't you be like Rahul? Rahul listens to his parents. Why aren't you listening to your parents? So it's I'm not exaggering. That's the crazy part.
Yeah, be like a Dwaita. Why don't you be like a Dwaita here?
Dwaita, when he was 2 years old, he was already chanting 64. Actually, I think when Advaita was 5 years old, I knocked on his parents' house. I was doing book distribution, and by accident knocked on Advaita Chandra's house. And he went with me, and he was like 5 years old, and he was telling people about the Bhagavad Gita. So. But most people are not like Advaita. So, why can't you be like Advaita Charya? 5 years old, he was already distributing Bhagavad Gita. You're like 16. You're not even chanting like 8 rounds yet. Like, what is wrong with you? So that type of stuff, it has a lot of damaging effects. One thing I've seen in many Indians, this is actually a widespread problem. If a child is repeatedly made to feel guilt over and over and over again, what it does to them is every time it happens and they feel guilty, it basically hurts their self-worth and sense of self-esteem. And so they'll basically start to feel very bad about themselves. If that continues for too long, that person can basically start to develop self-hatred, and that'll just be very bad for their psychological health, very bad for their mental well-being. It'll be very hard for them to be devoted to Krishna, because if you want to love Krishna, you have to love all living entities. We're all living entities, so we have to love ourselves. But if someone is so filled with guilt and shame because they've been repeatedly exposed to this type of guilting behavior, it can be very hard for them. It creates a lot of psychological problems. I've seen this. It's very bad. So that's a big problem. And another problem with it is because, like, we're in America now. There's certain behaviors that are not acceptable in America. Things that just like won't fly. And guilting is one of them. And so when like children are at school and they see that other American parents aren't really guilting, they're not really doing much parenting, to be honest, but that's another issue. And they see that when they go to school and see that other people are not being guilted, it's like, well, what's going on here? Like, this is weird. Like, how come like Bob is not getting guilted? Like, why am I getting guilted? Like, it's very confusing because like all your friends are not experiencing this and you are, so it's kind of like, I don't know. It's not tolerable behavior in like American culture. So when it happens to you, it's very hard because it's just not something that it's accepted in this country, basically. So that's another issue with it. Kind of related is the idea of individuality. That's a big difference between Indian culture and Western culture. Western culture is really big on individuality, basically almost to a fault. People are really individualistic. They'll, fight for freedom. They'll like die before they put on a mask during a pandemic or something. They'll really stick to their guns, and they have this strong sense of freedom. Indian culture is not quite like that. It's very much about, there's a lot of societal and familiar pressure. There's a lot of pressure to conform to a certain behavior so that, you look good in the eyes of, your parents' friends or Indian society. There's this saying I heard many times, many Indians hear this, log kya sochunga, something. Yeah, log kya sochunga. Yeah, what will people think? American culture, they don't care what anyone thinks. They'll come into school wearing a clown outfit if they feel like it. That's maybe not true. They sort of care what people think, but not as much. Indian culture, in some cases, every decision you make is motivated by, how you look in the eyes of other people. That's just not something we're used to in America. So when we're exposed to so much of that, it's just like, it's really annoying, to be honest. It's just really annoying. Like, we just want to be our own people. We see everyone else around us being their own people. So when we're like trying to fit into a box to, fit some societal expectations of a culture we've never interacted with, it's just weird for us. So those are some of the main things that ABCD struggle with. Is there anything I'm missing?
Yeah, just the idea is when you're forced or cajoled to do something, you won't do it. Like, let's take even Krishna consciousness, for example. Like, even when our parents become, or your parents, or my parents, fortunately, they were not Krishna. Why do I say fortunately? Because my mother would have forced me to be Krishna conscious. The same thing that he's talking about. My mother, because my culture is very similar to Gujarati culture, Jewish culture. People from Gujarat are called the Jews of India. Anyways, as you probably know. So we had a lot of guilt trips. If you really love me was a big one for us. I don't know if you got that. Not that one. If you cared, and as soon as I joined the Krishna conscious movement, it was, I got a message that your mother is dying. And she's dying because you joined the Hare Krishna movement. Talking about social, I'm just relating it to my own culture. And so, I was thinking, oh my God. Well, at least if she remembers me when she dies, she'll go back to home, back to God, because I'm a devotee. It's a little detachment, because I'm... And then when I went to visit her, I had to go in disguise, you know, wear a little cap so that people wouldn't see my sikha, put on Western clothes. She told everyone I had gone to Israel to join a kibbutz. And all of her friends, you know, this is very much relating with what you're going through. All of her friends would ask me, how was Israel? I said, well, it was great. So basically, when you're forced to do something through guilt or through threats or even through a reward, you want to do the opposite, because we have a natural, everyone, especially the children, have a natural need for autonomy. Autonomy means making your own decisions in life. And the problem is, if that need for autonomy is not developed, there's two things that will happen. One thing is the child will rebel completely. That's one thing. But perhaps even worse than that is that the child will not develop his or her what we call moral compass. Moral compass means to know what's right and what's wrong on their own. Because when you're always told what's right and what's wrong as a set of rules without any explanation as to why it's right or why it's wrong, then you just become dependent upon that set of rules. And then you can no longer think for yourself, you know, when you're confronted with, because not every situation will fall under the rules that you have been taught. I mean, most situations will not. You know, what am I supposed to do now? I don't know. Maybe call my mommy. You know, you're 45 years old and you're calling your mother. I mean, in the culture I come from, we have young men who are 45 or 50 years old still living, you know, at home. And you know, and the father's still there and everything like that, because they never cut the apron strings, so to speak, or the sorry strings, or whatever it is. So there's many challenges with this, you know, the natural rebellious spirit that people have. And so, you know, I think if my mother had forced me to chant rounds every day, I wouldn't be chanting rounds. So when you're dealing with your own children, and you want them to be Krishna conscious, this is even from a Krishna conscious perspective, let them chant when they feel like chanting. Not that if you really love me, you would chant. If you really want to be Krishna conscious, chant. If you really want to go back to Godhead, chant. You know, if you don't want to be a demon, that's a big one. the chant. Of course, you know, sometimes from other perspectives, if you want to be a demon, chant. Or, you know, you hear from Indian culture sometimes the opposite perspective, that, you know, spiritual life is meant for someone who's like 75 years old and retired. You know, now's the time for artha and kama. Artha means economic development, kama means sense gratification. Later on, you can have some moksha there, but, you know, if you lived past 60. So, is that?
Yeah, there's actually another kind of related thing I'll say just before turning it to others. But many ABCDs, they have the experience that when their parents explain Hindu concepts to them, it feels like parents don't really know why they're doing things. They just follow it because it's their culture. And when you're teaching someone about religion, if there's not a real solid, like, philosophical basis for why you're doing certain things, it comes off as very philosophical. It doesn't come off as philosophical, sorry. It comes off as very unphilosophical and just kind of superstitious. Like, when I was young, I went through a phase where I was kind of like, you know, not really interested in religion, because my exposure to religion is just like super superstitious, super just like doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. And actually, when I came to Krishna consciousness, that's kind of what attracted me in the beginning, is that, you know, there's finally like some philosophy, some substance to religion. Like, you know, it talks about the gunas, karma, reincarnation, who God is, like all these questions I finally got answered. But if religion was presented to me as just a bunch of rules, and we do this on this festival day, or we chant these shlokas, and there's no like deeper substance behind it, it's a very big turnoff for someone who's kind of exploring religion or trying to get deeper in religion. So like, it's very important that if someone is like, not just in like educating children, but even educating the public, like there has to be a lot of explanation of why we do certain things. It has to make sense to them. It has to be like rationally sensible. So that's an important part also.
That's good. You want to let someone else?
Yeah. Does any ABCDs in the crowd that want to share their experiences, or parents also?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Parents of ABCDs.
Hare Krishna. Yeah, I'm a parent of 3 ABCDs. and they're all born in the movement, and they've all grown up in the movement. But I think there's certain lessons that we've learned over a period of time that I think are really important for those who are here now. Okay? There is 1 in a million like Advaita. Okay? So please don't push your children with that kind of an example. Oh, look at Advaita, he does this. Look at Advaita, he does this. It does two things. One, it puts pressure on Advaita Acharya to perform a certain way. And just remember, he's still a child. He may be a very learned child, but he's still a child. So he's growing through it, and there are still a lot of things he's got to work out as he grows and as he gets exposed to this world. Right now, he's been in the shelter of Gurudev and his parents and this community. He's not gone out to work yet. He's not gone out to college yet. So there's going to be a lot of exposure that he's going to get, which is going to be contradictory to where he is. He's grown up in goodness so far.
Yeah.
Okay? Or bhakti, which is even beyond, but when he gets exposed to the modes of passion and ignorance out there, he's going to need all of this that he's got. And Krishna willing, he will keep all that, but there's going to be all those pressures that Adi Prabhu talked about. Okay? So that's there. And part of that also happens as questioning your beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Most of us, we chose Krishna consciousness. When they get into the critical thinking mode of college, or going to a PhD, they start thinking of what else is there. What did I miss? Is this really what is the right path? And if we've done our job right, they come to the right conclusion. Okay? But we've created certain foundation, and that is through the freedom that Maharaj talks about. We teach them everything. They come here, they learn, they go to Sunday school, they learn everything. But they make the decision to chant. As very little you bring them, but then they come to those ages, they make a decision to come here for every Sunday feast. You can't force them. Because as soon as they get freedom, then they will exert it to whatever they think is right, which may be pressure from peers out there in the world. So we really have to be conscious of this thing, which is very important. We can't be pushing them to do something because that's how we were brought up. Okay? Because as soon as they're out there in the world, they will exert that freedom and may make the wrong choices. So unless this choice is voluntary and unless they know that parents are aware of these challenges, parents are okay for them to go to a Christian church to check out, or going to a Buddhist or whatever. So that happens, and you can't just beat them up at that point and say, are you stupid? Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. You know he's the best. Well, you know he's the best. But they come back and say, well, Mom, you made that choice. I need to explore to make that choice. So those kind of things are challenges that we face. So we have to equip them to be able to fight those modes that are out there. They need to be able to discern the difference, to discriminate. They need to know that. And a lot of that they do by seeing us. If we are hypocritical and if we are dualistic and we are, so then how are they going to follow? And if we just keep pressuring them, we keep pressuring Advaita Prabhu to be to everything, or, his friends to be just like him, it doesn't work. everybody is their own individual and they all have their own path to go through, and we got to let them go through. So, I mean, that I think is the biggest pitfall that we, especially the Indian parents, fall into. I was fortunate that when I came to Canada, we were exploring, we didn't know. And very quickly, you know, as soon as we had the same kind of a thing, oh, my parents do this, you know, is because they just, you know, when you ask them why you do certain things, it's because my parents did that. And we were the, you know, the educated, scientific kids. And unless we saw the science behind it, we didn't. But as soon as we came into Prabhupada's movement, immediately we saw the science behind it, and we got, with Krishna's mercy, Prabhupada's mercy, and Guru Maharaj's mercy, we got down the path. But that has to happen for everyone. It cannot be forced.
Good, good.
We do, we do. We are also confused. You're right, because we are also confused in this culture.
I can answer that. Your love for the children should be unconditional. That's the key. If the love is conditioned, then it's not going to work. You know, then they won't want to be Krishna conscious. They won't want to listen to the parents. I mean, it'll be a disaster. I mean, I remember one thing that was very traumatic. So you have to look at it from a child's perspective. One thing that was very traumatic for me, that if I came back with anything less than an A on my report card, I wasn't her son anymore. Does that sound familiar to anyone? No, basically she didn't say you're not my son. She said, my son would never get less than an A. So when I did get a B, I learned how to use this invisible ink. And because in those days you actually took home a actual report card and had to be signed by the parents. So I would change the B to an A and have her sign it and say, okay, thank you, Mom. And then the ink, disappearing ink is a magic trick. So the whole idea is whatever, that you just have to be loving with them. And if they see Krishna consciousness like that, then they'll want to be Krishna conscious, because people ultimately, the most important thing for everyone, this is what Prabhupada taught us, is that we have a loving propensity. We need to love and be loved. And so if you're in a situation where you're loved and you're being loved, then you won't want to do anything else.
That's so true, Maharaj.
Isn't it?
And absolutely. And, you have to create a space in the house where they're going to tell you most things. They're not going to tell you everything, okay? But they'll tell you most things. I have two girls who are the older one and the boy who's the younger one. Always knew who the girls were going out with. And if they did go out with a boy, even that was told in high school, she wanted to go for a movie with a boy. You had to be accepting or something like that, because another friend's children, you saw the girls doing it anyways, but they lied to their friends, to their parents,
yeah.
And they lied, they made their friends lie to their parents too. So everything was done, but it was done behind parents' back. So the fact that my daughter was able to say in grade 10, I want to go out with this boy to see this movie, it was okay. Because then you knew where they were, and they weren't doing anything behind your back, which was really important. And when they did, if there is something, I think that unconditional love is very important, that Maharaj said. They have to know that if they do slip, they're able to come to you and say, Mom, I slipped. I know it's easy to say that, but really, it was hard. I was a full-time working mother with very responsible position. So it was very hard. But it was important that the children should be able to come to you and say, and know that you still love them even when they do the B, so that they don't have to change the B, that you knew what their grades were.
That's good.
And I'm proud to say that all of them were like, 4.0 GPA kind of thing. But, they've had problems. They're still having problems, but that's part of, we are still having problems. So it's part of the material world, and we got to recognize all that.
All right. That's good. Thank you very much. So I want to have one other ABCD. Just say a few words, and then I'll have to speak about Janmashtami because we're getting late right now. Oh, you're an ABCD. Vikashananda. Well, why do we have it? Oh, there's a. All right. Why don't we have one of the ABCDs first?
Okay, Hare Krishna.
Go.
I have 2 points. I think one is that there's a lot of gender, there's Desi boys definitely have a much more freedom than the girls do. And I grew up with a sister, and I grew up with no men in my family other than my dad. And my dad is already very feminine. But when I go out and I see my friends who have brothers, older brothers, younger brothers, if you're a male in the house, you are allowed to go out with friends. You're allowed to go out with a girl, even as a friend. You're allowed to, go have fun. So I think that is something that we need to look out for, because I feel like Kali Yuga doesn't care if you're a female or male. It affects everybody. And my second point is that with religion, at least, is that when I was growing up, I didn't grow up thinking Krishna was our father figure. I grew up thinking Krishna was my friend. And so when I was alone in my room, I would sit in front of a picture I had in my room, and I'd talk to him even about the most sensitive things that you wouldn't talk to your parents about. And I feel like growing up feeling safe and being able to, when I tell my mom everything, because I know that even if she's my safety net, and even if I slip, she'll catch me. So I think that's really important.
Very nice. Yeah, very understanding parents. So what not you, Vikashananda Prabhu.
Thank you. I wanted to comment on the point that Jajurani Mataji said about when the children are growing up. For those who were young and came into the Krishna conscious movement, or those who were born into the Krishna conscious movement, Krishna conscious was basically handed over to them, and they were at the point where they didn't really question. But the moment critical thinking starts coming in, they would start questioning, maybe some exploration around as well. Whereas for the parents, the parents actually had an opportunity to explore, to question, to look at scientifically the things and so forth, and we chose Krishna consciousness. So the point I wanted to make is that we do find that children will sometimes come to that stage, and then they will say, like a Christian church or a Buddhist monastery, and I think that freedom should be allowed to them. And there's this saying, if it's about that thing, if you love somebody, love a bird, let them free. If they truly love you, they'll come back to you, kind of a thing. So you will find when these children are exploring in that exploratory phase, they will explore whatever options that are out there, and eventually will develop an understanding that Krishna consciousness basically offers everything. And those children, when they have done that exploratory job, and when they come back to Krishna consciousness, they'll be grounded more in Krishna consciousness than when it is just handed over to them. So that's just one comment I wanted to write. The other questions I have, maybe Adi Purush Prabhu, you from your perspective, you can answer this. That one question is, when I used to interact with a lot of young children, teenagers in the Krishna consciousness movement, one thing that I often hear is that, like you said, a sense of belonging. People would go around in their high schools, especially in high schools, and they would say, oh, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Hindu, oh, I'm a Gujarati. And they would say, who are you? And they would be like, I'm ISKCON. And now the confusion is, am I ISKCON? Am I Hindu? Am I what? Okay, so that's one question I have. And then the other question is, I think some of you touched upon that, was, you're going out with a boy to a movie, right? Or something of that nature. The other pressure in high schools, like you said, things have gotten worse since you've been in school. But the other pressure is in high schools having a boyfriend or a girlfriend. And then, we have, my friend so-and-so, they hang out with so-and-so. And it's not as like what one would think. It's more like, going out for a movie or going out to a restaurant or going out to a boba shop for a cup of tea or what have you. So those are just some other challenges. I wanted to hear your perspective, Adi Parush Prabhu, on these points.
He'll pass the microphone to you.
I can't speak to the first point too much because I wasn't raised in the movement, but yeah, I imagine that's difficult. I will say the second point, I didn't mention this, but I think it's also helpful to be aware of. There's a lot of pressure to basically have, I think I mentioned this to some extent, a lot of pressure to have these illicit relationships, kind of like if you're like 14, 15 and you haven't like lost your virginity, you're kind of like a loser in school. There's kind of that pressure. So I don't really know the best way to like manage that, but I just thought I'd mention that like that pressure you mentioned to have a boyfriend or girlfriend, it's very strong. Like, a main motivation for some people, they may just date someone not because they like the person, not because they're interested in, that type of thing. They just don't want to get like, be the loser amongst their like friends in the social circle. So kind of at the root of it is this lack of belonging. If people don't feel a certain sense of belonging, they'll want to have boyfriends, girlfriends, just so that they don't get like criticized by people in their social circle. So that's kind of a big pressure going on.
Under the shelter of Prabhupada, because they are familiar with the philosophy, they are familiar with the principles, they are familiar with the behavior generally to be had. And that stays with them even when they're exploring. So it's not something that just, it's not that weak. So most of the exploring that I saw was more on which is the right path. It was not that there is a path, that this path is, like there is no God. That's never been the case. It's just that which is the best practice. And one of mine does practice Buddhism. But the way she practices Buddhism is just like we practice Krishna consciousness very seriously. It's just that her style is different. It was meditative. So she chose that. And at first we fought that. Onkar Prabhu argued forever with her, the philosophy part of it. But she knew our philosophy better than he did because she did study Prabhupada's books very seriously. But then our Guru Maharaj said that if problem is not the practice of Buddhism, the problem is that people don't practice it properly. And he said, well, if they practice it properly, then that's okay. So we had to kind of let her choose that, because we chose this, and she respects that, and we had to do that. The other two are, and she still thinks Krishna, like the blue boy, she meditates on him, but just a little differently.
Good. Yeah, I think Adi was touching on it. Another little point is that nowadays in America, there's a lot of pressure to do things that we would consider to be illicit. And if you don't do them, I didn't have that sort of pressure when I was young. And, it's actually become much more prominent, I think, in the last 20 years. If you don't do them, you will not have friends. And for children, friendship is number one. There's, you may have parents, but your friends are everything. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to belong to social circle. We're going to have to, and it'll save you. We were going to ask another ABCD, but we have to end now because the time is, we could speak a lot more about this. It's an important subject, and I'm happy that we spoke about it. And the video from this we're going to be using in other places to show people. And that's one of the reasons I'm giving the seminar next week in around Chicago to a whole community of devotees. And I'm going to introduce this as part of the seminar, some of the topics we're talking about. So now we're going to talk about Janmashtami and Balaram's appearance day, because I see Ditya Prabhu is just saying, let's get to it. So, but it's interesting. I thought it would be quite interesting for everyone to hear that this ABCD business. So basically, we have a wonderful opportunity not just to come to the festival, eat prasadam, and dance and chant. I mean, everyone likes to do that. But there's a wonderful opportunity to render service, because by nature, all of us are servants of Krishna. That's where you get all the mercy. I know in my particular life, I'm still rendering service at my age, and a lot of things I have to deal with, a lot of difficult people, in management situation. I'm GBC of this temple and many other temples and around the world, and it's dealing with people is sometimes really challenging. And sometimes I'm thinking, maybe I should just go to Govardhan and chant and be happy, chant be happy, goodbye cruel world. But then I realized that my path, and the path all of us have been given by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada, is a path of service and compassion. Like before we talked about book distribution, which is a very important service, and Aditya Prabhu was expert in that, and so much ecstasy in that. But then I experienced, I was asked the other day by one of my disciples, she's not here right now, Temple President Leela Shakti, how do you tolerate all these things? Because, it gets really overwhelming. I said, I think I'm doing it for Krishna, I'm doing it for Prabhupada. And I'm getting more realization and more ecstasy than had I just been sitting down and chanting and trying to enjoy spiritual life 24 hours a day. Because I understand that's love. Love means you do something, you take an austerity. I mean, like being a mother is something like that. You take the austerity for your child. I mean, changing diapers. I couldn't imagine that austerity. I'd rather do anything, sit in the Himalayas in ice cubes for 3 years than change diapers on some kid. So, isn't it? But when there's love, it actually, isn't it? It actually becomes relishable for the person loving it. So, people look at, what I have to do, and they say, how can you do all these things? And I said, because I love Prabhupada. And this is the reason for us serving. And then by serving, Mahat Seva Mahurvi Muktes, we were talking about bad association here in class, Karnam Guna Sangasha Sadasat Janma Jonishu. Then you get Krishna's mercy by serving a devotee. Like Krishna says, one who says he's my servant is not my servant. One who says he is a servant of my servant is my devotee. So by serving Prabhupada's mission, because everyone here is serving Prabhupada, we may think, and Radha Golokananda, of course, but we may think, oh, this is just my duty. No, it's not your duty. It's an opportunity to serve and become ecstatic and please Krishna and exercise your loving propensity and connect to the spiritual world. Wow. So Aditya Prabhu will be speaking about the opportunities one can get. I mean, there's a lot of things we can do for Janmashtami. We get sometimes 6,000 or 7,000 people coming for Janmashtami. That's a lot of people throughout the day. And Balaram's appearance day, obviously a lot less than that. So we have so many programs. We're renting so many tents we're going to have here, so much prasadam that needs to be done, cleanliness that needs to be done beforehand. And it's a wonderful opportunity to connect to Krishna and be happy. And so this is really, that's the message. And Aditya Prabhu, you wanted to say something? No? That's enough? Okay. So, so just you coordinate, if you're interested, see Aditya Prabhu. Who else can I see? Vikashananda Prabhu. That's Vikashananda. He was the father of an ABCD. And Adi is not a father of an ABCD, but he is an ABCD. So they can see any of these different, these two different devotees. Who else can they see? What's that? Mahamantra, who's not in the room, right? Oh, there he is. Mahamantra, he's a BBECD, Bolivia-born, confused devotee. He's from Bolivia. And so, see these devotees, and, some coordination could be there over the next weekend. I guess will be the special weekend to prepare, right? And, Wednesday is Janmashtami. Okay. Did you want to say something, or? Okay. Give him that microphone.
Hare Krishna. So let's thank Maharaj and also Adi Purush Prabhu for bringing up this very, very interesting topic. So before we go to Balaram Purnima and Janmashtami, I just want to make an announcement so you can mark your calendars. This is on September 30th, the last weekend of September and 1st of October. We are inviting Mother Gopi Gita here, and she is actually, some of you know, she has actually written a book called Leadership Parenting, and her book is like extensively researched, and she's now invited at different like corporate places and give like a whole weekend, a seminar on just this topic of parenting, you know. So please mark your calendar, September 30th, that weekend, Saturday and Sunday, both days we'll have a full workshop. And just to mention one point from her website, just had it here, yeah. So you can look her up if you just search Mother Gopi Gita. Her book is called Leadership Parenting. And from her website, she mentions, if you're done feeling anxiety about your children and want them to step into social comfort, high productivity, academic success, and spiritual motivation, then that's what her seminar is all about. So I highly encourage everyone to register. We haven't sent the registration form, but it'll be a fully organized, like, you know, she does it in a very professional way. She has expert knowledge. She's been called all over US just to come and give these talks. So please mark that weekend, September 30th and October 1st. Okay, so that's for your... Yeah, she actually was a part of her community here. So she went to school here. So yeah, she's very amazing devotee, and you can look her up on YouTube, and her classes, her spiritual realizations. It's just wonderful to have her association. Okay, so coming up this Wednesday is Sri Balaram Purnima. Sri Balaram Purnima ki. So as I announced, 5 p.m. we'll start the festival. We'll have class by His Holiness Hridayanda Das Goswami Maharaj. He's a very, very senior disciple of Srila Prabhupada. So he's a visiting guest, so he'll be giving the talk. After that, we'll have a beautiful Abhishek of Sri Sri Krishna Balaram with wonderful kirtans. And then we'll have Artik and wonderful Prasadam for everyone. So if you'd like to sponsor any aspect of the festival, we have the feast for $301.